You're listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me today is Jeff Franke, and Anna is back this week.
Yay!
How's it going?
Good.
We're the editors of Manufacturing.net and Industrial Equipment News, and each have about 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. Every week, we take the 5 biggest stories on our websites and discuss the implications they have on the manufacturing industry going forward. Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, subscribe to the podcast. You can also do us a big favor by giving us a positive review on Apple Podcast or whatever platform you use. Finally, to email the podcast, you can reach us at David, Anna, or Jeff at IAN.com with email the podcast in the subject line.
I've been here every week.
Yeah, but you're
known
also
you
in
for
the same
20
spot.
years.
This is, loyal listener Doug reached out to me and said, I think the only reason you didn't have a stumble was because Anna wasn't there. And that just proved true so fast. Anyway, you could also do us a favor by subscribing to the newsletters if you want to make sure that you get the podcast in your inbox first. How are you doing today, Jeff?
Good. I'm glad that Anna not only is back, but that she made it through unscathed. Those family vacations, it can be a little tricky. So especially with the 3 little ones. So
Yeah, there was a lot of sand being thrown. Stop throwing sand.
I mean,
Just finish a cup of coffee? Stop throwing sand.
Are you at the point still where you just understand you're always going to have sand in your house now? All right. Well, let's get rolling. Our first story this week, U.S. orders water recall after illness and death. In March, we talked about the company Real Water that issued a bottled water recall after reports of acute non-viral hepatitis, a liver illness, in kids. Last week, federal authorities ordered a complete recall and ordered the Las Vegas-based company to surrender records to investigate at least one death of a woman in her 60s. The order stops production and distribution and requires the company to recall and destroy all the product produced before May 26th. To turn over to the FDA records about processing, bottling, and distribution, and to submit to unannounced inspections of company facilities. The product is sold as premium alkalized drinking water infused with negative ions and offers healthy detoxifying properties. The federal civil complaint says the product is treated with chemicals including caustic lye and a mineral salt. The company's website is down except for a statement by the president, Brent Jones, and the company's phones are no longer in service. Anna, the company kind of went dark.
Yeah, this is premium water. Mm-hmm. It was way back in March that Real Water issued what they called a precautionary recall of this product. Illnesses were being reported at that time. The FDA cautioned consumers not to drink it, not to use it. So I was surprised to see this recall because I thought foolishly that this water was no longer available. But looking back a few weeks, it appears that Real Water was still actually available commercially via some online retailers. And according to an investigation by the FDA, the company had actually not informed all of its online retailers of the recall, which sort of forced the feds to step in with their own nationwide recall here. But meanwhile, more illnesses, one death potentially that's being pinned on Real Water. I don't know. It's pretty sickening to think that a company can voluntarily recall a product and then continue to distribute it while people continue to get sick. And frankly, for a company that without question is going to face numerous lawsuits, why?
Yeah.
This demonstrates I think pretty willful disregard for health and safety, and I don't think it's going to help them in defending themselves against these lawsuits that are already being filed. Were being filed months ago.
Did they do anything to discuss why they didn't inform their distributors?
I don't know. That I could not find.
Yeah.
So,
An administrative error.
Right. Yeah.
Jeff, this seems pretty egregious.
It does, and you wonder at what point, and I'm sure there's a lot of different legal protections here, that this doesn't almost become criminal. Because when you talk about lye, I mean, I'm familiar with that from agricultural applications where you put that into the soil, yes, to help it become less acidic, but you can also essentially poison the soil or any plants that come in touch with it. Lye is a very dangerous chemical. I mean, it can be very helpful, but also got to be very careful with it. So to see that was actually found in the water is scary. This whole process, the alkalining of water, it's something I was kind of oblivious to be honest. I've never looked at this. I've heard of these water products before, but understanding that they're essentially taking municipal water throwing it through this magical piece of equipment to lower the acidic levels of it that makes it different, unique, special, potentially more healthy.
Magic.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind
Add a
of
bunch of chemicals to it to make it more healthy.
Yeah, and it's so the company uses a proprietary ionizer to apply an electrical current and create positively charged and negatively charged solutions. So I guess whenever I see that kind of jargon on a bottle, I just think it's BS. I don't ever think it's going to poison me. Just because, it is still something that is regulated by the FDA. I think that you should have a minimal expectation that these products are safe enough and won't kill you. But when I see it, my snake oil sensor goes off.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, this is high priced because it's alkalized.
But the one thing to remember, and the last thing that I could find, last dollar figure I could find in terms of market value was from 2017. And at that point, this was a $630 million industry just in the U.S. for this ionized alkaline water. So there's a part of me that also wonders, because this is such a detrimental story. I mean, just what this company did, as Anna alluded to, essentially being oblivious to the potential negative elements that could come out of this process. What is it going to do to this industry potentially? Because you do have some people who are doing it right. Is this going to kind of bind them all together?
Maybe the company knew. Maybe he just knew he was sunk, and it's like, I got to move as much of this as I can. Before
Yeah,
I
I mean,
down.
that's really the only explanation, right?
Yeah,
terrible.
it's not that he had the best intentions. So
Yeah.
because it made me think of snake oil, I had to look it up. Did you know that the original snake oil was actually beneficial? So it was tied to Chinese railway laborers, and it was packed with omega-3s. They would use it to help treat like arthritis and bursitis.
Is it actually snake oil?
Yeah, it was actually oil derived from snakes, and they would use it, however, topically, I believe. But of course, like any good product, in 1916, Clark Stanley, also known as the Rattlesnake King.
Yeah. I'm gonna
He's a
start
professional wrestler.
I'm gonna
Yes.
start calling you the Rattlesnake King.
Actually, you were
Well, easy
Cobra.
there, Cobra.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Clark sold snake oil liniment, which was mostly mineral oil, and he was prosecuted, pleaded no contest, and with no admission of guilt, and was fined $20. This is before there was even the FDA, which is, the equivalent to $476 today. So dating back to the first scam,
Yeah.
they didn't have to pay anything.
Wow.
So also, if there's a book on the Rattlesnake King that anyone can recommend,
Snake
I'm
oil
in.
wasn't like poisonous though. They were just
It just didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So that was, he got prosecuted for fraud because it was just mineral oil
Yeah.
with a new wrapper. It was alkalized snake oil. Very good. The fourth most popular on the website this week, Factory Boss Defiant is sanctions bite in China's Xinjiang region. Reports of forced labor and other abuses of the largely Muslim Uyghur ethnic group in Xinjiang, China, is taking a toll on its cotton industry. But will the pressure compel the government or companies to change their ways? Li Qiang is the general manager of the Huafuch Fashion Yarn Factory. He said that while the company lost money in 2020 for the first time in its 27-year history, it bounced back by shifting to domestic orders. Lee blamed a sharp fall in foreign orders as customers like Adidas and H&M cut ties. And he blamed it on fake news in the 2019 Wall Street Journal story. The company also cited U.S. sanctions and the coronavirus pandemic for the losses. And I feel like this is more than fake news.
I appreciate that the term fake news is now globally relevant. I don't know. This story has implications, I think, as it brings to light some of the humanitarian issues that are part and parcel with some of the industries and supply chains that have all but vacated the U.S. In order to keep costs down, and textiles is, of course, one of them. The exploitation of this, how do you say, Uyghur? Is that how you say?
Uyghur, yeah.
This ethnic group in China has been well documented. And that's like, it's a terrible situation over there, but I think, let's be real, like it doesn't take a week or two to pass before another story in another region shines a light on some of the atrocities and exploitation that's happening to textile workers and other workers in all kinds of countries. And, as an example, the actress Kate Hudson, her mom is Goldie Hawn. Yeah.
I'm familiar. Yes.
Creepy.
It's all right. I'm familiar. Yes. That must be better.
The bad thing is she knows David too, so that's
Right,
where we have
yeah.
to be worried.
Yeah, we can no longer communicate.
Anyway, she is having to answer to some allegations that her factories are like the factories producing her line of athletic wear are abusing their workers.
Oh, wow.
And she has been always, like front and center, like we empower women, blah blah blah. Like this happens all the time. And I'm not trying to underplay or play down what's happening here specifically because it's an atrocity. I guess what my conclusion is just that, we continue to expect ultra cheap clothing here in the United States. We've covered this recently, that people aren't willing to pay more for Buy American, even though we talk about it. You see companies try to play the textile game here, and it's really, really difficult to do so cost effectively and compete against these other supply chains. So if Americans are simply unwilling to pay more for these products to sort of shorten these supply chains, then you feel like you're kind of just playing whack-a-mole with these scenarios. H&M and Nike, they walk away. Where are they setting up next? What's next? I just don't feel like maybe progress is necessarily being made because something becomes very public.
Yeah.
And then they feel like they need to walk away from that region.
Yeah, they have to make a PR pivot.
Right.
All you need is 2 black shirts that you wear into the ground for a decade. That's all you need. Jeff, what I was frustrated with is how I see terms like coerced and forced labor, and we don't say slavery.
Yeah. The issues surrounding everything that's going on with that ethnic group in China has been documented, and Anna spoke to it very, very eloquently. So all of those things are difficult to comprehend, especially in this day and age where it's just hard to even understand how there could be a class structure like that in place that's universally everybody's just okay with it.
Right.
They just embrace it and say this is what it is. It's hard for us to really fathom and understand. I think in addition to that, and it's good that more of this is coming to light, and there are some of these companies who are taking a stand. The reality is, though, we don't know what's going on in Indonesia. We don't know what's going on in Vietnam and some of these other places that's where they're moving to. They're not moving to North Carolina, okay? That's where they're moving their facilities to. We don't know what the conditions are like there. Maybe we'll find out more. We certainly hope it's not some of the things we hear. In particular, it seems like it's always Bangladesh and India in some of these textile production. They're not even factories there. I mean, the last one we covered was a 2-story apartment building.
The
Ghost factories, yeah.
So there's that. The one thing that I did think was interesting is for a Chinese company to be this transparent in terms of some of their losses. They did say they lost over $60 million last year. I thought that was interesting. That they were talking about that. They were also saying they made almost $20 million in the first quarter, so things are coming back. A while ago, when we talked about some of the reshoring that was coming back to the U.S., it was textiles, but it was furniture because there was such an issue with supply in terms of getting furniture that was made overseas here on time. It's been compounded lately with the pandemic. But when it comes to clothes, it's just not cost effective to make a lot of that here. Yeah. When you look at all the cotton stuff that this particular place is putting out, and it's mainly being used for clothing, bed sheets, towels, things like that, there aren't. It's tough, and it's not just the U.S. It's also other more developed or larger economies in Europe and every place else where most of this stuff is coming from is this pocket in Asia where they can find less expensive labor. And for a company that's putting out that much stuff to show profits trending towards what we're looking at the first quarter, so they're looking at $80 million in potential profit this year. It's a head scratcher a little bit, and I know there's been a lot of movements towards, like what Anna was talking about buying stuff that costs more because it lasts longer, and then you're not going through this vicious cycle of getting rid of clothing and recycling and all that. That's, I think, where this can really be addressed most potentially, more powerfully, is that people can kind of grab onto that and go that route and fulfill that. I don't know how there's no way to legislate that or enforce it or anything.
No, I feel like that's
production caps on or something. But
well, I mean, that's like a slippery slope to, uniforms. Everyone will wear their Monday coverall today. The one thing that bugged me was they had a very nationalistic tone in all of their comments, that they're going to rely on the domestic supply chain, and I just don't think that that's what the world needs right now is more nationalism tones. I also wanted to point out that the U.S. didn't just ban cotton and clothing; they also banned hair products, tomato products, and computer parts. And I just seemed like that was a weird mix.
You know what though? I don't know. I can't speak to the other two, but we ran a story maybe 6-8 months ago about how there was some hair extensions that were being sold in the U.S. that were produced there, and they believe that the hair was human hair that came from prisoners.
Yeah, from the Uyghur.
Yeah.
That is troubling.
Really?
Yeah. And they still supply 1/5 of the world's cotton. So, I mean, a lot has got to change for the world not to be so dependent on this region. The third most popular story this week: a ship fire rages for the 6th day. Crews from Europe and Sri Lanka battled a fire on board a container ship for more than a week. The chemical fire aboard the MV Express Pearl has caused a large number of containers to tumble into the sea. So, salvagers, prepare your fleets once the ash settles. The ship is operated by Express Feeders, which is working with local authorities to try and save the vessel and its cargo. The ship was carrying about 1,500 containers, including 25 tons of nitric acid and other chemicals that were loaded at a port in India on May 15th. Fighting the blaze has been particularly difficult because of adverse weather due to impending monsoons. The crew members were evacuated, 2 are in the hospital, and the others are in quarantine. Jeff, you escape a blazing ship and you get locked in quarantine. That is a bad situation all around.
Well, I think this is going to be a continuing story. This is going to be a bigger story than even right now, because as we're recording, this thing is still burning.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I think the interesting part of this too is the backstory is, according to the BBC, there was 2 other ports that would not allow this ship in because it was leaking. One of them was actually even in India, which, let's be real, does not have real high environmental standards. Okay. So they even said no. Sri Lanka let this ship come in, and as a result, as it got closer, bad things happened. And now they're seeing a lot of this plastic that has fallen off or melted off the boat. It's washing up on shore. It's in the area. They had to keep fishermen away from the area. So it tells you this wasn't just a dead spot in the ocean. I mean, there was also activity here other than just shipping. I think this is going to be huge, because if this thing burns down and if it does actually sink, these containers of these horrible chemicals that are in here, horrible in that they're not supposed to be just left out in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
I think this has the potential to be an ongoing issue. I mean,
Like ecological disaster.
just in horrible proportions.
I don't know about you, Anna, but ever since we started doing this, it feels like we have some sort of shipping industry disaster every week. And I will admit, until we started doing this, I was very ignorant to it. We would cover them all the time, and it didn't sink in that this is happening every week. Is this...
Sink in.
You just got to cold sell it, man.
Okay,
You got to
okay.
play cold.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, we
Right?
didn't pretend.
Don't
we
drop
didn't.
an anchor on the podcast, Jeff. Sad.
That was bad.
Sad.
That was bad.
We're just going to wash
We're
over
just
that
going
one.
to troll right past that.
Oh, it's getting choppy out here, guys. Anyway, Anna, is it just is it symptomatic of the time, or has this been happening longer than I'm, realizing?
Well, it's possible. I mean, I don't know. I think that it's possible that people are more dialed into supply chain issues because we've seen so many shortages. It's possible too. I think this came up in one of our recent podcasts that maybe people are moving double time and cutting some corners and trying to get this stuff, moved as fast as possible. I don't know. I do recall that we covered a story in October about another serious fire on a ship that was also off the coast of Sri Lanka, and that was carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil.
Well,
Right. And like this ship, there's potential for an oil leak, they said.
Yeah.
Like besides the nitric acid, all the horrible caustic chemicals that are just sitting there waiting to fall into the ocean.
And it seems like that's what they're more focused on.
Is the
really,
oil.
Is the oil.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's because there's maybe more money attached to that load as opposed to these other chemicals in terms of what they can, I don't know. But
Yeah, I don't know. Or is it easier to extract a container than it is to pull oil out of the
Yeah.
water, or less expensive? Maybe, I don't know. But either way, I think these points kind of just, they speak to the impact of climate change. We talked about how like extreme weather and high winds and monsoons, like this is contributing to not being able to put this fire out.
Right.
In the case of the ship in October, it was the same thing. Basically, like the fire was put out, and then like 2 days later, it reignited. They said because of the high winds, and it actually reached like the proportions that it was at previously, at the worst of it, again.
Yeah.
They had to put it out again. I don't know. I just think like it's exacerbating these existing problems, and they're just, like precursors to pollution disasters. And it's almost like two heads from the same neck. It's like these two catastrophic problems that are coming from our inability to manage the earth.
Well, I think, this was just the most popular shipping disaster or disaster at sea this week, because there was another one where inclement weather sank another boat, right?
Recently we had that one of those folks down in the Gulf, bad wind, tipped over it's kind of a rigging platform type of boat, horrible situation. I think it was like a dozen people passed with that one. So and I do think it is because there is so much more pressure right now to get things done. We're reopening. There's a demand for so much more product and more industrial activity. People want to get out there and do their jobs, and maybe some of these safety protocols just aren't being paid attention to the same extent that they were before, and that they obviously need to be.
Some of it has to be the weather, right? Some of it has to be, or is it just,
But
or just not paying attention to it.
Yeah, or to Jeff's point, like weather that you wouldn't normally go out in. That was the situation with the Gulf ship that capsized. Like that was weather that they said normally they wouldn't expect a ship to go out, and they did.
That one was really spooky because that individual, one of the guys who was missing, actually called I believe his wife or his girlfriend before that and said, like, I don't want to do this.
Oh, man.
They did not have a choice.
Yeah.
It's very disconcerting to hear some of these things.
Moving on to our next story with an equally grim tone. No, not necessarily. But Tesla, because it's our podcast and we have to talk about the company, Tesla was fined for limiting battery range. A court in Norway found Tesla guilty of throttling charging speeds and battery capacity. As a result, the company is ordered to pay 30 plaintiffs $16,000 each. After a routine over-the-air software update 2 years ago, drivers lost from 12 to 30 miles per charge and experienced slower charging at supercharger fast charging stations. That's a lot of charging. Tesla said the update protected vehicle batteries and improved their longevity, and that only a small number of vehicles were impacted. The company can appeal the decision, but just in Norway, there are 10,000 Tesla owners, and more suits are coming, including class action filings in California. Jeff, Tesla is just having a bad day again.
What is the company culture like at this place? We've heard some stuff on the plant floor, and I think that's different from sort of the upper management, if you will. Because what is it like? Do they do stuff and they're just like, you know what? We're just going to tell them. This is just what we're going to do. Because in my understanding, these software upgrades, these over-the-air updates, you don't have to accept them. This is the same thing as like with your cell phones. When you get the update, you just do it because you get the annoying message all the time and everything else. But in this instance, if they could have done something where they said, look, you guys got an option. When you send this out, this is either going to make your battery last longer, which was what their focus was on this. It wasn't malicious intent to somehow, negatively impact performance of their vehicle. It was to preserve the battery life, which is the most expensive part of it to ever replace when you're talking about an electric car. Why don't they just give them the option? Say, hey, you can take this and say, look, you're going to sacrifice range, but you're going to get more life, or you take the upgrade.
Yeah.
Just
clarity, right?
Why is this hard?
Or more of a heads up. It just made me feel to think about every software vendor we have ever dealt with. And the example about the phone is a good one, because I always do that update because I expect them to, keep my phone operational and protected and secure. But on a business perspective, we have software that we use for content management systems and other things in the company. And whenever they roll out an update, we just hit refresh. The update is there. Things have changed, and we don't know what the hell is going on. It changes our regular operating procedures every morning. Not every morning, but like for the morning. And it is very frustrating. So I think that something like this has to be much more clearly communicated. Hey, we're going to run this update. It's going to improve your battery overall, but you're going to lose a little bit of range. And I think people would be more on board with that if they didn't just run the update and then let people figure it out for themselves, you know?
Well, yeah, because like the problem now is like so look at our website. Like I think the commenters were kind of divided on whether they thought this was a deliberate strategy by Tesla to get customers to trade up, kind of like what Apple was accused of for like slowing down their devices, their older devices. Or if Tesla was just failing to communicate well, as they have done in the past. But I mean, yeah, as you guys said, that's not their strong suit. And I think they're known for being kind of brash and overconfident with what they're working on and rolling out, almost like they don't owe anyone an explanation, which they do. I thought it was interesting to see another Tesla story break just this morning about how two consumer safety organizations, IIHS and Consumer Reports, basically pulled their safety recommendations for Teslas, a couple models of Teslas, because Tesla pulled the radars that guide those safety systems, and they're going to use cameras instead. But those agencies don't consider that to be adequate within their guidelines or whatever. But do you
Someone
think
did something.
Well, like, does Tesla not care about that? Like, did they not bother to check? It's just strange. It's strange PR. Like, to let that happen. I mean, you know, there's something to be said, I think, about due diligence and not just like going rogue and like letting the shrapnel fly like Tesla seems to do all the time. I don't.
Yeah. Well, the thing that always gets me with this stuff too is these are enthusiasts. Like this is the equivalent of like an owners group essentially. If you buy a Tesla, they're on board. They just they want to drink the Kool-Aid.
They love them
so bad.
Yeah.
And Tesla's just like, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you get too excited about this.
It's like someone knocks on your door and they're like, "We're here to remove your tires."
Yeah. Well, I mean, the theories about planned obsolescence, I would believe that more if they weren't already struggling to keep up with demand. I mean, it seems like that'd be a real early play. Like, we got to start cashing them out. Man, we're still like millions behind.
Yeah, let's fire up that wait list though.
Yeah. Just like, hey, no one saw this feature going out? Yeah, we are way behind our timelines. Like, put it back. No, I understand why there's a lot of disgruntled people. It's like we were talking about with the roof, the solar roof, where everybody, like you said, everyone's just trying to do the right thing. Just give us a heads up.
Yeah.
And I understand the frustration. All right, our most popular story this week: supersonic jet maker abruptly shuts down. Aerion Supersonic was an ambitious plane maker backed by Boeing. The company wanted to create boomless supersonic passenger jets by the mid-2020s. And then they closed, likely because they were out of money. The company said, quote, "The current financial environment has proven hugely challenging to close on the scheduled and necessary large new capital requirements." The company said it had $11 billion in a sales backlog. Anna, what happened?
I don't know. I mean, I have to say I was surprised by this, and that's because this company wasn't just quietly fading into the shadows. They were actively promoting their product developments as recently as April, and in a very public way, right? But with hindsight being 2020, now I kind of wonder, like, was this a desperate Hail Mary to generate some publicity and kind of help with their funding goals? Because I think one of the business impacts of the pandemic that people didn't really talk about a whole lot as we were focusing on like Fortune 500s and the impact on existing businesses is that the recession really dried up a lot of venture capital streams for startups.
Okay.
And, you know, that environment became much more challenging for them. So if you look at a company like Aerion, who is looking for like, you know, a potential rebound for the air travel industry in the somewhat near future, they're probably still fighting uphill after a year of pandemic. And you consider that 9 out of 10 startups fail anyway. Why would it be a plane maker whose product and development costs are insanely high? And, you know, they're sitting in a recessionary climate, facing down this industry that's like not even close to battled back. I mean, it's not a good set of variables. So I rescind my original point of being surprised. And now that I think about it in more detail, I guess I should not have been surprised.
Just scale back, right? Just, all right, we're just going to work on the third size models for now. You know, we're just going to do strict R&D. I don't know.
They said $4 billion was going into building that plane.
Yeah.
And that's not production costs, I don't think. That's
Just product
R&D.
development.
Yeah, and like that is a lot of venture capital.
Well, and I guess if you're backed by Boeing, it's not a good time right now to be backed by Boeing.
Well, Yeah, I mean, let's be real. They've got some other stuff to deal with.
Yeah.
So, but I think the reason that it was surprising was just the numbers that they were throwing out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talked about $4 billion in product development costs. They were talking about a $375 million facility they were going to build in Orlando, and just as recently as I think it was February, they had like a $320 million or $300 million public offering that they were going to do to raise funds. So, in going through some of this, it actually reminded me, and I know you've watched it. I don't know if you have, Anna, that documentary on John DeLorean.
Oh, yeah.
Where he had these huge, grand plans, except he didn't have the money to do them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, obviously, he took a more nefarious route in trying to raise those monies, but yeah, very similar. And I think, you know, to your point, Anna, too, about private investment funds drying up. GE is the other big partner in this. They've got some other things they're dealing with right now. So they did have a lot of very public partners, but those public partners got fires in their own yard to take care of.
Yeah.
Well, if they make a documentary and Alec Baldwin plays the CEO of Aerion, I'm in.
You're in.
I'm in.
It probably would not be as dramatic, but that was highly entertaining. I would recommend it. Yeah.
The report from Engadget said that, you know, aircraft design is expensive and the pandemic created concerns over how long it would take for air travel to bounce back and what travel might look like as people are, you know, remote and hybrid work is becoming more permanent. But according to the people that I've been talking to in the industry, most are eager to get back on the road and many didn't stop. So I don't know. I feel like at least business travel, the bounce back is going to happen quicker. Maybe not recreational travel, but maybe that's just thinking optimistically.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and this is very specialized business travel. This is like business class airplane. It's going to be expensive to fly it because it's supersonic and boomless, like super quiet, right?
Right.
So I can't imagine that's cheap. Our company is going to want to pony up for just, you know, every salesperson to be taking this plane. I don't know. I think people are going to cut back.
Yeah.
I mean, I see that a lot anecdotally of companies saying, like, this is the new normal. We're going to try to use Zoom when we can. It's working for us now. I think there's still going to be some non-negotiable airline travel, but I really don't think it's going to come back the way it did before. I mean, I've been wrong before.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. Jeff, what are your thoughts on it? Are people going to travel again the way we're used to, or is it over?
I don't know. I think there's a couple different dynamics here. I mean, we've traveled enough for work that if we can drive someplace, we do it.
Yeah.
Because it's the hassle.
Yeah.
And now you guys have gotten smaller kids. I know when my kids were small, that was doubled down on that. I mean, I would rather deal with them in a car than a plane. As they've gotten older, that's different. But I think, you know, we're on the cusp of Memorial Day weekend, and the news this morning was a ton of people flying, huge flight numbers, the most in like a year and a half, basically, since the pandemic started. So it will, but I don't think it's going to come back in the same way, because just like e-commerce has affected retail, I think people's behaviors have been adjusted in a way that they will avoid a place like an airport, especially if the prices go up, especially if it's more crowded, and especially if they just have any lingering thoughts or doubts about being that close to that many people. From a business perspective, we've figured out ways to still be very effective in working with people without going to their front door or hitting a trade show.
True.
So I think it's going to be a lot of personal preferences, but overall, yeah, I think it'll definitely have an impact.
I'm just disappointed to see a supersonic plane maker go under. I know there are still companies out there like Boom Supersonic.
Yeah.
Just because the work they're doing, while now is very expensive, will have incredible returns down the road. And we will have to travel at some point again. And if we could do it in half the time,
Oh, yeah.
I'm down.
No, I'm into
Yeah.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
international travel that takes half the time, that's half the scotch.
Okay, so maybe I'm not on board. It just means I have to drink twice as much before I get to the airport. Moving on to In Case You Missed It. Jeff, what is your In Case You Missed It this week?
So we ran a story called, the headline, Navy Vows New Course After Ship Design Maintenance Problems. And this one caught my attention for a couple reasons. As a former Army guy, anytime we can have something negative about the Navy, that's all right.
That's totally what I thought when I saw you picked it.
Yeah, but the other thing I thought was really interesting was actually the naval authorities that came on. They were very transparent, which you don't see a lot in these situations. Usually they're touting more of the things they want to do and they will do, as opposed to the fact that there are some very real shortcomings in terms of the development and actual production of a lot of these ships that they're looking for. also very transparent, and this has been going on for a while in terms of why they need different types of boats. With things shifting in the Pacific in terms of being more concerned about China, more concerned about Russia, they need a different type of vessel to get where they want to go and to deal with a lot of these different types of threats. And in talking about the issues that they've had in terms of not only developing new products, new boats to put out there, but also just maintaining what they have. And I think the dynamic that they've been caught up in is it's not like a new Jeep. You've got infrastructure that's floating on the water. So anytime there's any type of upgrade from a technological perspective, a weapons perspective, you have to figure a way to tack that onto a 30-year-old boat and make it work. And you've got a lot of people, thousands of sailors to take care of on that vessel as well. So the Navy has a very unique problem. And the fact that the number of boats also affects the number of troops that they need to have, number of sailors. So it's affected their recruiting a little bit as well. The Navy was the only branch of the military that actually had lower recruiting numbers over the last year.
Really?
They still met their goals, but they said they wanted fewer than the year before. So I think it has a couple of different dynamics here. And I think just the transparency of it was what really surprised me. It was very refreshing, and it was probably very much needed so that the folks who are in charge of appropriating funds to make these things happen are looking more closely at what we need to do, because the Navy will obviously play a key role if we are looking at our biggest threats from a defense perspective coming in the Pacific.
In the name of transparency, can you share the title that you earmarked this story under?
Let me look for the exact verbiage. I believe it was something along the lines of, basically, the Navy kind of sucks right now.
I bet that just feels good for you to say, right?
I don't feel bad about it.
No, Anna, I'm not very familiar with the Navy, but what was your take on the story?
The thing that stood out the most, and it actually made me feel kind of bad for the Navy, was that picture with all the rust on the ship, and they took a whole bunch of guff. I was trying to think of the right word.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to get bleeped out.
Shade.
Shade.
A lot of
For
Navy
that,
shade.
yeah, a lot of shade for that rust. And you just think, like, man, anytime you have aging equipment, like, think of all the facilities that have aging equipment that's not that attractive and it's not on center stage, to be like a national embarrassment. It just, like, those poor maintenance guys, they were just like, oh, another thing.
Yeah.
And I have to do it today.
We couldn't buff that out first, guys.
I know.
Anna, what was your in case you missed it this week?
Yeah, so to me, one of the most interesting stories that I saw this week was the story about ExxonMobil's board. It's being called a landmark scenario. So an activist hedge fund has successfully facilitated the ousting of 2, possibly 3 of Exxon's board members against the will of the company, because investors are saying that Exxon isn't doing enough to address climate change. Exxon has said that they have a plan in place, that they're working on it, and this hedge fund leading the charge is called Engine Number 1. Basically, they're like, it's not fast enough. Your slate of directors are not equipped to make this happen. So they proposed a few new candidates, and a few were actually voted in. And this is largely unprecedented, especially in the big oil realm. The reactions have been mixed as to what this means. Like, some are alleging that this will actually do little to change the will of the majority of the remaining Exxon board members. It's like a 12-member board. So, but there's a lot of voices out there who are saying, look at the success of this. We will begin to see growing pressure from investors to push companies maybe a bit faster and harder than they're comfortable with. So I thought it was an interesting development, and I wonder what the ramifications will be for the future for both Exxon and other public companies, because I think, a lot of people were really surprised that this was successful.
I mean, talk about surprised. When I read that Exxon to lose at least 2 board members in climate fight, I certainly didn't think that the ones that were losing were, or that they were gaining were pro-climate. I figured they were, Jeff, I was figuring that they were given some climate change loudmouths the boot.
Climate change loudmouths.
I don't know. It's so hard to not
Is
curse.
that what you call me behind my back?
You climate change loudmouth liberal? No. I just... Jeff?
Keep going.
No. The hole's
don't.
already deep enough.
Don't keep going.
Well, it was wow, man.
Evil laugh included at the end.
Right. And this came on the heels of another story we ran where a court in the Netherlands actually ruled in favor of some activist groups against Shell, where they basically said, no, you need a more concrete plan, and they've ordered them to cut emissions by, I think it was like almost 50%, 45% by like 2030 or something. So a lot of these groups are definitely gaining ground. Now, Shell can appeal because this was a court ruling. It's not as dramatic, I don't think, as these board members basically get in the boot because they weren't being strong enough advocates for environmental regulation. So it really says a lot in terms of the pressure that these activists can put on these individuals. There's getting more people who are more prominent and, quite honestly, to be honest, have the funds and the money to get enough influence in these companies to make them really change. The one thing that I thought was interesting, and just going back to the Shell case, is the problem wasn't that Shell didn't have a plan, it's that it wasn't a concrete plan. And I do think that's a big positive here. Don't just say, yeah, we're going to do this. Yeah, show us how you're going to do it. And I think a lot of these groups will be a lot more, I don't know if patient is the right word, but more accommodating or saying, well, we're part of this. We're working together because we're seeing what your plan is. This probably won't work, but we can help you with these things. And if you're going to really do this and do it right, it's not necessarily about hitting a goal by 2030. It's about making sure you're doing it right going forward once that plan is in place.
Yeah.
So it is good in that respect, I think, to see more pressure being placed on these companies to develop real plans and not just promotional campaigns.
Right. And I think it sort of speaks to the fact, too, that this isn't just like an issue for tree huggers anymore. There's an actual economic impetus for these changes to occur because no one can sell a product no one's going to invest in the stock market if we're all dead. So, I mean, we need to figure it out. It's true, though. I mean, like the world is made up of consumers. All these industries are struggling against the impacts of climate change now, you know?
Even just from a more pragmatic perspective, though, all the regulations are getting tighter. So if you're not in spec, you can't do what you need to do. You're not making money.
Right, or like how much profits are impacted by fines and things like regulatory issues that are going to come up and hit these companies back potentially sooner rather than later. I mean, they have to be ready for that.
For my story this week, I went with this new series that we're working on, the Quantum Apocalypse and the Quantum Computing series, because I wanted to end it with a real barn burner. But it posed the question, is the quantum apocalypse a hoax? And I thought maybe, because I don't know what that is, but it sounds dire.
Sounds like a hoax.
It sounds bad, yeah. So I tried to break it up in this 5-part series that I'm doing with Alan Grau. He's the VP of IoT and Embedded Solutions with Sectigo. But basically how it works is quantum computing is the combination of quantum physics being used with computing and with computer technology. In just a few years, it will have the tremendous potential to solve problems faster than traditional computers ever could have worked. So, for example, in the next 5 years, quantum computers will break codes that have taken lifetimes to crack, with current technology, and it's going to solve them in a matter of days, if not hours. And Grau's point was that some industrial manufacturers are taking the necessary precautions to protect data and investing more heavily in security, and others are not. And a lot of that split has been voiced on our website because some people say that it's like a lot of Y2K sort of smoke. And, some people are more dire, saying that, this could wind us putting us back in the 1980s where everything is done by phone, fax, and FedEx. And, I mean, other than fax and FedEx, I mean, I wouldn't mind going back a little bit. But I just found it to be a really interesting story on something that I didn't really understand. And I don't think that a lot of manufacturers understand, because there are a lot of sort of Grau's point was that there are a lot of sort of for lack of a term, hackers out there that are recording data now that can't be hacked and will use quantum computing to hack it in the future.
Sure, yeah.
And the other point that's really cool with this series, not cool, devastating, but part of the story was you remember that water plant that we talked about that got hacked and
they almost poisoned.
Yeah, they tried to poison an entire town. He says that this could cause a lot more of that, just because a lot of the security is already very vulnerable, and this is going to make it all that much easier to break it. And so I found the conversations with him fascinating, and it seems to be, in my opinion, a real problem that needs addressing. Some manufacturers are, others aren't. And some think it's a hoax.
So does he contend that we should be adding like some sort of regulatory framework around this, like they are proposing to do with AI, for example?
he's not regulatory framework. He's talking more about like what individual manufacturers can do to protect themselves. I'm sure that I know that he does sit on different boards that want to have more regulation over that. And his point is how to keep up with the criminal element, so to speak.
Sure, yeah.
But I know that he does work on both aspects of it. But he's trying to get manufacturers to look at how their individual devices on the plant floor are talking to each other and how they could be vulnerable going forward very soon, a lot sooner than people think.
And a lot of that stuff is already super vulnerable. Yeah.
Well, and, even the term, you hear quantum computing, and it sounds futuristic. So it seems further down the line than like 5 years.
I picture the giant computers in, is it Superman 3 or Superman 2? Anyone?
I mean, I'm
The giant computer room?
No.
You could pick a lot of references for that.
Yeah.
Is this the one? This is the one with Richard Pryor.
That's Superman 3.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the best one.
Oh, yeah.
Unequivocally. I won't.
I don't know.
I will not argue this. I'm not taking comments on this.
All right. Somebody's feeling feisty after being gone for a week.
Yeah, right. Our poor taste in movies aside. No.
Kudos to you and Alan. This is great. This is a really good series. I'd highly recommend folks checking this out because this is something I didn't have a great understanding of. You guys do a great job of breaking this down so that it's not less complex, but it's easier to understand. This is really good stuff. I think what this brings up a little bit too is one of the things we've talked to people about is where does the greater security concern lie? The microprocessor manufacturer who provides that, or the person who builds the computer? Who's more in charge of the security? Because you can't have enough right now. I don't think this is a tomorrow problem. This is a now problem. I was thinking of another better movie, like Live Free or Die Hard, right? I mean, that guy walked into everything.
Oh, man, we're going down a terrible sequel wormhole. Yeah, I love Police Academy 9, too. No,
Oof.
I don't even know.
But no, I don't think it's that far out there. I think this is a now thing.
Yeah.
And, no, this is good stuff.
No, I just and you actually raise a good point where it's not who's responsible for the security. It's everyone's responsible for making it more secure. And I don't know. I think sometimes we wind up on our own personal islands, and you feel like that island is secure, and so you don't really worry about anything else.
There's definitely a head in the sand type of approach that's real easy to take with this stuff because if you I'm not going to claim to completely understand this, so it's a lot easier to be like, well, they've got to figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Apple.
Yeah.
How could somebody hack into this?
Yeah.
It's Apple. No.
So in that same vein, when it goes bad, you could be like, I can't believe Apple didn't have this. Yeah. Leave it to the pros. All right, moving on to our final thoughts. Anna, what's your final thought this week?
Well, I missed the podcast a little last week when I was sitting lakeside and popping a straw in my Capri Sun. But I hope you enjoyed guest star Andy Zoll, but not too much because I'm going to be here most of the time.
No, it was. It's great to have you back, and it's been a long time since I've seen Andy, so it was good to, the first time seeing him was, hey, we're going to record it too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't. Did you catch it? Did you catch his interesting perspective on the construction workers with the autonomous car trucks?
That was my favorite part, actually, the podcast, because he was so right on the money. Because I was just thinking, what a weird situation, but I didn't really, until he articulated it, I didn't quite consider that was the worst part, is that poor construction worker moving those cones, and then the car's in his face.
The
it's
man,
probably 1,000,000 degrees.
Yeah, manning the cones. Jeff, what's your final thought this week?
I am actually going to ask our listeners for some help because during the pandemic, I have sampled, I think, every single microcraft brewery in my grocery store.
Oh.
So if anybody has some good thoughts, suggestions on a local brew or something that can get my hands on, I'm looking for something different to try.
So you're saying that you've drank all the beer in Wisconsin?
Everyone.
Okay, so other than your
we're out of beer,
your cry for help, did you try Ale Asylum's F COVID beer?
Yes.
Was that any good?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was good. It's a little bit. It's not. I don't know. It's a little bit darker, I guess, than what I would usually go for. But it was good.
Yeah. What are you normally into?
I like ambers.
Yeah. Okay. Send your amber recommendations to Jeff. One at a time, though.
Free T-shirt for whoever has the best suggestion.
Ooh,
That's right.
That's a
keep shipping out those IEN t-shirts.
Good deal.
My final thought this week is I just hope everyone had a good holiday weekend. Love your family as long as it's warranted, because sometimes it's not. And
Wow. You're making lots of friends.
And also, make sure you know the room before you come in hot, because we're doing some remodeling in the office, and that's why we're in this rogue office space upstairs. But so the inspectors came the other day, and clearly thought no one else was in the office other than the foreman.
Yeah.
And he just walks up to the foreman. Foreman's like, "How you doing today?" He's just like, "Ah, I just had to really hand this guy his ass at this other job because this conduit was all messed up," and just was really laying into him, like setting the tone. I'm the boss man. And I just blasted laughing because it was the most, hard flex I've seen in a long time. And he just turns around like shaking, and I'm like, "Oh, I got you." I wish I recorded
We're
it.
friends.
So yeah, just check the room before you come in hot. That's all I'm saying.
Good advice.
Right? These electricians got enough trouble as it is. Anyway, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast, and to email the podcast. You can reach any of us at Jeff, Anna, or David at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also do us a favor by subscribing to our newsletters. Make sure you get the podcast first. For Jeff and Anna, I'm David Manti, and this is the Today in Manufacturing podcast. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.